This is your homework?
Yeah.
What did the teacher say when he gave it to you?
She was sad.
She was sad?
Yeah. I can't read.
Okay.
So it's been about a month since Charlie Kirk's assassination, and there's a new story relating to, I guess, some preschool teacher decided to have their 5th grade students take home some packet where it's called The Life of Charlie Kirk, and it has a little section on, what he was about. Then it asks you true or false questions, and then reading comprehension, and just like a little packet that goes over stuff about him. Now, this has drawn issues for 2 different reasons. One is that a lot of people do not feel like he should be taught in schools, either because they think he's insignificant or because of his positions and their disagreement with it. And 2, the packet, and I can't dispute this, is being accused of whitewashing or otherwise sanitizing Kirk's, legacy or the various things that he actually did. So, like, in the packet, there's no mention, from what I could see, of, him talking about DEI and all the, just any of the stuff that would be more controversial. But I guess I'm kind of 2 minds here. I really do not like the educational system in the United States, specifically when it comes to history. I feel that history is often glossed over for a lot of younger students, the ones in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade. I gave the example of how when I was in preschool, I knew what the Civil War was. I knew that it was some conflict that we had internally, but the idea of, oh, by the way, the South basically became their own country for 4 years wasn't something I picked up on or realized until high school, and then became aware of the different generals and various battles and the Reconstruction and whatnot. So it's me basically saying that with a lot of things relating to history, I always feel as if it's very not sanitized, but it doesn't really go in depth. And with this assignment, it was clearly more trying to use a recent historical event for, because a lot of it is like, reading comprehension, right? Repeat what you read here, or what did you see right there? So it wasn't mainly about actually learning about him, but just kind of using his imagery as the subject for this assignment. But like I said, people who think that he's insignificant, they have the right to feel that way. I mean, if I were to sit here and go over, like, if we're talking about current, history from the last, let's say, 10 years. Okay, Trump, whether I like him or not, very important president. President is always usually of some very high consequence. But it's like, we get a whole packet, this school, rather, these kids, on what was essentially a podcaster, before we get one on J.D. Vance, right, the current vice president, the former vice president Mike Pence, the other former vice president Kamala Harris. I mean, like, I guess the issue here is that because I know how skimmed over, right, historical events can be in these schools and in these classrooms, where they just kind of, maybe they'll mention somebody besides the president here or there. It's really, that's where I feel like people who are saying he's not that important have a leg to stand on, because even people who I would deem as being significant would not get talked about hardly or at all, right? So, like, look at all these ICE raids. I would say Kristi Noem is a more important person than Charlie Kirk ever was, and you probably won't see her get mentioned in any packets or homework assignments. But I guess what's kind of sad about this is that I'm one of these people where I never feel like you're too young to know about, just like basic history stuff. So I guess for me, I would rather they just not talk about him at all, right? With children that are, in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. But if they are going to talk about him, and it's really because, again, we need to see after a set number of years to what extent Kirk's legacy is actually a real legacy, right? It's easy to say somebody's a very important a few weeks or a month after they've died, but then in the years following, we'll find out more if he's still resonant with people. And when you get, students who are in, I'd say 8th, 9th, 10th grade, right, when they start getting up to the age of college, right, then you can talk about the podcaster who, dropped out of school after high school and, started his own organization off the backs of, all these rich people, but still. But yeah, it's just one of those things where I guess I agree with the sentiment of like, why are kids being taught about Kirk? Like just why? But then also I'm not really against them knowing who he was, or at least having some familiarity with him. I just wish it wasn't the sanitized crap. And it's unfortunate because you always think about how conservatives will say that, all the schools, these are indoctrination centers. It's like, well, hell, all I'm pushing for is that you at least tell us what the commentator who is the subject of this packet actually stood for. Talk about him saying that if his 10-year-old daughter was R-worded, he would make her carry the baby. Talk about how he said he thinks it's worth it to have some gun deaths, 2 years before he ends up being a gun death. Talk about him calling the former first lady an associate justice unqualified for their positions, DEI hires. Or how when he sees a black pilot, he gets scared of being on the plane. I mean, like these are, if they mention this stuff, I would have, especially again with kids who are a little bit older, right, like 13, 14, 15, right, when you start getting close to the age where you can, pick up on these things and kind of, do a little bit more critical thinking. I would be all for that if they want to mention them. And I would go even further. Talk about all of the different, conservative commentators. Talk about Rush Limbaugh, one of the mentors for one of Kirk's heroes, right? The guy who was praising AIDS victims as they were dying during the 80s. I mean, I guess what I find so funny is that, and I always think about when I was in, my first years of being into politics, I wanted to be a history teacher, but I'm not against teaching any stuff about anybody who I would deem as having some level of importance, however much other people might disagree. But you have to do it in a way that conveys who that person actually was. I don't like this half and half thing that we do. Because it's dangerous. I think it's almost like we're getting a version of the lost cause in the 21st century, with Kirk was just this podcaster who had different opinions, and he was trying to debate people to have common ground. It's like, yeah, you can say that, but what did those different, and again, we'll never condone or support what happened to him, but what did those different opinions entail? Was he saying something that was offensive to other people? I don't like that they do this stuff. It's really dangerous, because when you make the other side not have their positions known for what they were, it is a way of, again, sugarcoating the past and then making that person that is now being lionized or discussed seem like they were better than they actually were. Which is why I'm comparing it to a lost cause, because it's just like with the South. Oh, they didn't fight the Civil War mainly to preserve slavery. It was for states' rights. Just you do the same thing of making the group that had motives or did something wrong not look as bad by trying to sanitize what their actual intentions were, what they actually did was, just by keeping certain things out. It's just like with McCain. That's another example, right? I think he's one of the most important senators, at least of the 21st century. But let's call it what it is. Even though he gets a lot of praise for stopping, Trump from just completely doing away with Obamacare, that doesn't change the fact that he was a warmonger, that he was someone that voted against Martin Luther King Day even when Strom Thurmond didn't. I mean, you have to, just when you mention these people, talk about what they are. I don't care who it is. Like, let all the positions be known. Otherwise, what's the point of even discussing this stuff? But man, it's wild that I like when I was a kid and even first getting into this stuff, I used to think that the way someone became a historical figure was if they were either elected to office and did something very significant, either in a good way like FDR, or in a bad way like Joseph McCarthy, or if they were a private citizen but contributed to human rights in a very profound way, like Martin Luther King or Ralph Abernathy. Or in a very bad way, like Jerry Falwell. But it turns out that all you have to do to be of importance, to where you get a whole packet at a school about your life, is just sit on the computer, talk crap about minorities, go to college campuses, debate kids that are barely even out of high school, and if someone shoots you, then suddenly you're considered, one of the preemptive voices of your generation. It's wild.